Let's talk more about Labor Day with our next guest, Scott Hogenson, who has a great piece this week in TownHall. The headline is White House hits panic button on big labor. What's going on and why is the White House panicking? Scott, great to have you with us, sir.
Hi, Vince, longtime listener, first-time guest. It's an honor.
Well, it's great to have you with us. Scott, thanks for doing this today. Tell me what's going on this Labor Day with labor.
Well, one of the things with labor unions is that their membership has been dropping precipitously in recent decades, and now it's gotten to the point where only 10.1% of Americans working today belong to a union.
Right.
And the reason that matters, primarily for political purposes, is because unions typically give so much money to Democrat campaigns, Democrat candidates, and Democratic campaign committees. And if you look at the tens of millions of dollars that are given to Democrats by major unions like transportation unions, building trades, the mailmen, the teachers union, they give anywhere between 75 and 99% of their money to Democrats. And when union membership falls to 10%, that's a warning signal for the White House, and that's why they came out last week with Vice President Kamala Harris talking about her historic announcement about labor.
Yeah, and what does Kamala Harris know about working a real job? It's amazing that she's the front man for this, and if it's a weird relationship that the Democrats have with the labor unions, because the reality is that the Democrat Party has been right at the front of diminishing the very jobs that many of the people in those unions held for such a long time in American history. Right? They did that by opening the borders, undercutting labor in the United States immensely, and also shipping so many manufacturing jobs overseas that it's gutted American communities and diminished the very places that were once labor union strongholds.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the reasons why Vice President Harris was talking about this historic announcement. And that's a quote. Their historic announcement, and then she made this a week ago, it's on the 28th.
I love when you call your own announcement. I love when you call your own announcement historic. We should do that. We should do that every day. We should be like, this is a historic radio broadcast.
Maybe even unprecedented, who knows? But Kamala Harris's historic announcement was that the Treasury Department had written a report about how awesome labor unions are. I mean, I'm serious. That was the historic announcement. Yeah. And that tells me that it's like, oh boy, we're in big trouble. We need to throw a bone to the labor unions. And as far as the labor union leadership is concerned, I don't think they have too much to worry about. But the rank and file of the labor union, membership, yes, like you were mentioning earlier before the break, those people aren't going to buy it. That dog just won't hunt.
No. And what we saw, especially from 2016 onward, we've seen massive upheaval inside of the labor union structure because you have the rank and file who, it turns out, have a difference of opinion about which politicians they support and like and who's going to be better for them and their families. Meanwhile, that is not the way their money's used. So they pay these union dues, and the leadership at the top uses it to get Democrats elected uniformly.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Vince. There are a lot of rank-and-file union members who don't like what's happening to their money, and that's why you're seeing so many people that would work in otherwise unionized trades in right-to-work states that are opting out. I mean, when I was a kid, starting out, in Minnesota, you had to join a union if you wanted a job, and so I did. But that is not the case today with so many right-to-work states, and as a result of it, union membership is falling through the floor, and with it, the ability for the Democrat Party and its, tentacles to latch on to those tens of millions of dollars of union money that is starting to dry up.
Do you ever get the impression, too, Scott, that government unions have broadly given unions a bad name, perhaps unfairly in some cases, especially the teachers' unions? You've got government employees who are unionized negotiating against the taxpayer and then giving us a crappier product. And the end result is people look at that and they go, well, that's what unions do? And I can tell you, knowing people who are part of private sector unions, they resent that and they see themselves in something very different than these government unions.
I know, and you mentioned teachers union, and it's just so tragic because I know teachers who are very good. I know there are a lot of good school teachers out there. I know there are a lot of good schools out there. I know there are a lot of good school districts out there. The problem is because of the union leadership, I don't know which schools are good and which one of them are just incubators for Marxist theory. And a lot of parents are coming to that same conclusion. And if you try to find out if your kid's school or your kid's class is a breeding ground for being taught race hatred and alphabet stuff and so on and so forth, they're not going to give you the time of day. And it's just tragic that so many talented, hard-working, conscientious teachers are getting slimed because of the actions of their union leadership. And
Yes.
I think that's just another way that unions sort of display that they are not very useful anymore. It might be that they're just disintegrating before our eyes.
Yes, and that's how you end up with like Randy Weingarten living high on the hog, partying on
Oh my
remote
God.
islands, and
Oh
not
my
actually
God.
serving her membership well. And so you have the good teachers who are left basically holding the bag because they have to pay these union dues, and then they get the crappiest representation possible.
Not only do they get crappy representation, they also find themselves sort of mired in the social and cultural mess that is
Yes.
being advocated by so many of these teacher unions. I personally know education professionals, classroom teachers in the public schools who look at some of the stuff that's coming up in the curriculum, and they look at that and they're like, holy cow, this is insane. I can't do this. But if they start to push back against the union, they are in for a world of hurt. I pushed back against the union when I was a kid. I was in a world of hurt, and I don't think things have changed much since then.
No, not really, especially because another example of this, especially the intersection of politics, is you do have rank and file guys who work trades across the country who are compelled by their union leadership to campaign for Democrats whether they want to or not. They have to go door knocking and tell people, hey, vote for this guy, even though they and their family will not be doing that. They just want to keep their jobs.
Yeah, and when they are called upon to do this kind of stuff, you can bet dimes to dollars, man, there is a union commissar in the company of them to make sure they toe the line. And if they don't, Lord help the man who says the wrong thing.
Yeah, it's so crazy. The reality here, too, is, it's worth, as we reflect on Labor Day, it's worth reflecting on the history of the labor movement in America, too. Although, of course, there are going to be many great rank-and-file union members who've been beneficiaries of that collective bargaining over time. The extent to which the left has really identified with Labor Day and the labor movement has often been characterized by Marxist or even anarchist violence in the United States.
Oh, yeah, a lot of the big upheaval of the union labor movement in the United States in the early 20th century. You look at guys like Eugene Debs, dedicated communist, a lot of it percolated up from that Marxist / socialist / communist ideology. And so that is absolutely what underpins most big labor in terms of the policies and the leadership and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
They're little, and I just want to say this so your listeners, don't think I'm just some sort of a clown, but I belong to some unions. I belong to 2 unions in my life, and I know how it works. And I see labor unions as little microcosms of totalitarianism. And if you step out of line, woe be to you.
Yeah, it's amazing. And what they're supposed to be is kind of, helping lift up. The way it's sold is that, hey, we're going to lift up the little guy. We're going to empower you by making it so that we all kind of band together and negotiate for better outcomes, and it'll be better for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm happy to honestly admit that there was a time when labor unions made a big positive impact on America when it comes to workplace safety, when it comes to reasonable working hours, when it comes to, better wages. Yeah, the unions in America, during, the formative years of the Industrial Revolution, they were indispensable in, improving worker safety. But
Right.
If you fast forward to the 21st century, a lot of the concerns that were faced by the guys who worked at, in the blast furnaces in Western Pennsylvania, or the little girls working in the garment factories, in Manhattan, those things are mostly covered by new and growing federal safety regulations.
Sure.
And then you talk
and they've
about
been pushed out of the country entirely in many cases.
Exactly. And so with government regulations, you have the role of the unions in that respect being, slowly phased out. And then you talk about wages and collective bargaining. Yeah, collective bargaining will do that. And there's a whole big economic argument on inflation that I don't want to get into right now. But if you look at the current situation, union wages are rising slower than non-union wages. There's a law firm in Atlanta that tracks this stuff. And last year, non-union workers got a raise of 6%. Sounds good. Almost keeps up with inflation.
Yeah,
union jobs, 3.5%. So it's just not keeping pace.
And you can kind of see why, because union negotiations are drawn out, deliberative affairs, and inflation has gone up so quickly in this country, and companies that haven't had to deal with unions have been able to respond in a more nimble way.
Yeah, that's true. And in fairness, a lot of these, just like you said, these union contracts, they are drawn up for 2-year terms, 3-year terms, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So if you look at the rate of inflation today, maybe it's X. But 2 or 3 years from now, while this union contract is still in place, that inflation rate may be X plus Y or X plus Z. And so the union members get the short end of the stick. And, it's just another one of the structural problems with the job that unions are supposed to do for their membership.
Scott Hogenson, I do have to say that labor, union or otherwise, is definitely changing in the United States. We can see it all around us. The number one job in most states in America is commercial driving now, and things are changing very rapidly. And the left sees another opportunity for, once again, more government imposition there, because they think that eventually all of our jobs will be overseas, as apparently the plan is continuing, and that we will be required to receive universal basic income, that the government will have to cut us checks because there will just be no more jobs here in America.
Yeah, and if you want to crush a person's soul in a hurry, remove them from the satisfaction that comes from a job well done. When I was a little kid, very little kid, I had no idea what I wanted to do. One week I wanted to be a fireman. The next week I wanted to be a tap dancer. My father used to tell me, even if you're a ditch digger, be the best ditch digger that you can be. And therein comes the pride and dignity of a job. And there ain't no pride and dignity in getting, free money from the government, which is taken from somebody else who's working for a living.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Yeah, you could have been the next Gene Kelly, Frank Sinatra. Why'd you give up the tap career? You would have had a good one.
Well, firemen got to ride around in these totally cool trucks, and I like the cool trucks.
Yeah, I don't blame
like every red-blooded American boy. Gotta love them red trucks, man. They're awesome.
They are. They really are. Scott Hogenson, happy Labor Day to you, and thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Vince. I will now go grill meat.
Excellent. An excellent way to spend Labor Day, grilling